This is Billy Kay with the Complete Caledonian Imbiber, which celebrates the Scots' drouth for the great wines of Europe. Episode 3, my archive programme from 1994, Let Them Drink Port. I'm sitting in the veranda of the Graham Quinta dos Malvedos, perched high on one of the few straight furlongs of the River Douro. Just beneath are orange and lemon trees and fruit, and an olive grove festooned with the glorious purple of morning glory. Opposite, reflected in the river, are the mountains, girt with the green horizontal stripes of perfectly tended vines. It's rugged, peaceful, and stunningly beautiful. It was here the Scots came to make one of the world's great wines, port.
Ye bring to me a pint of wine, and fill it in a silver tassie, that I may drink before I go. A service stay, my bonny lassie.
A warm welcome to Complete Caledonian Imbibers everywhere. Port drinkers, this is your life. Port didn't get off to a good start in Scotland, for after the Union in 1707, the new UK government, with its strong English bias and Francophobia, attempted to wean us away from claret, symbol of our old alliance with France, and get us hooked on port, symbol of their not quite so old alliance with Portugal. John Holmes' epigram encapsulated the era. Firm and erect the Caledonian stood. Old was his mutton and his claret good. Let them drink port, the English statesman cried. He drank the poison and his spirit died. Poison? No. But mouth-searing plonk? Perhaps. For at that time port was not the great fortified wine we now know. For that development, bring in the cavalry.
What made the trade, essentially, was the initial forays by Scottish merchants into the depths of the district that we call Treasures Monts, behind the mountains, behind the Serra de Marão, where it all happens.
Dow is a great Scots name, and there was a Roderick Dow. He'd actually left the business by the time my great-grandfather got involved in it. But, I mean, he was, again, one of the Scotsmen who made such a big contribution to the port trade. And we also have a small company which belongs to us called Gould Campbell, which could hardly be more Scots. Port is often called the Englishman's wine. A complete mistake. It should be the Scotsman's wine. The English drink it, or possibly being the greatest drinkers, but it's actually the Scots, to a great extent, have created this business.
Paul Symington and Ian Sinclair. Despite its faults, the Union did open up huge markets created by the English to Scottish entrepreneur. J.M. Barrie's observation that there is no sight half as impressive as a Scotsman on the make would have been applauded by young blades called Graham, Coburn and Sandeman. George Sandeman speaking to me in Oporto 1994 and writing to his sister in Perth in 1790.
When a person has left his native place for a long time, he wishes to show some sort of splendour when he returns. Therefore, I shall remain where I am till I shall have made a moderate fortune to retire with, which I expect will be in the course of 9 years, which, to be sure, is a long time, but some lucky stroke may possibly reduce it to 5 or 6.
What we always knew was that George Sandeman came from Perth, that he borrowed £300 and started up a business that specialised in port and in sherry. The question we always asked later on was, did he pay the money back? He borrowed it from his father in a sort of very nicely written, flowery letter where he explained that he wanted to set up this business and he had one ambition, which was to become wealthy. Actually, by the time he died, he was quite a prosperous wine merchant.
The first Coburn came from Leith and fought his way with the Wellington armies through the north of Portugal and finally liberated, if you like, the town of Oporto. And as soon as he was demobbed, he came back, the year of the Waterloo, 1814, and started Coburn's then. Robert Coburn, who started Coburn's, was the younger son of Lord Coburn, Henry Lord Coburn, who was a Scottish judge. And the Grahams, I think, were pretty aristocratic, still are.
John Graham, who is my great-great-grandfather, ended up going to Leghorn in Italy. And during the Napoleonic Wars, he was actually advised to leave Leghorn and ended up in Portugal. And he set up a textile business here in the north of Portugal, basically. To the horrors of certainly his father and his relations in Scotland, he accepted payment of a bad debt in the form of port. His bosses back in Glasgow were horrified by this. I presume that he ended up sending back samples to Scotland, and they suddenly realised that it wasn't such a bad idea after all.
Johnny Graham of Churchill Graham, who market their Port of Leith in Scotland, and Peter Cobb of Coburns. Now, one has to admit that some of the great port houses are of English origin. Warrs, Taylors and Croft, to name the most famous. Many were general trading companies in Portugal at the end of the 17th century. But the Scots were certainly at the forefront of the experiments with brandy to create port as we know it today. And even in the most English of firms, the Scottish influence is felt. Warrs is owned by the Symington family. Taylors is run by Alistair Robertson, whose people came from Oban, while our man at Croft is Ian Sinclair.
Well, those of us who are Scots, of course, promote the idea that, the Scots did it all single-handed. There are Scots, yes, but not Scots, many of them from Scotland. Scottish extraction, yes. I myself, I think I'm the only Scot from Scotland in the port trade. Nobody else has come out from Scotland to work here in the last many, many, many years. The Symingtons as a family, I think they came out 100 years or so ago, not much more than that. So they're relatively new in port circumstances. Having said that, they're the most successful company here. They have built up since the early 60s the most phenomenal business.
Owning Gould Campbell, Smith Woodhouse, Quarles Harris and the prestigious Dow, War, Quinta do Vesuvio and Graham vintage port marks, the Symingtons are a modern port family dynasty. Amias Symington and I visited the Graham Quinta dos Malvedos and braved the heat of a July morning.
Somewhere around 100 degrees would be a hot day. What we like to see is about 80 to 90 this sort of time of year.
Some of the early Scots pioneers who come up here, I wonder if any of them ever went mad in the heat and jumped in the Douro.
To a large extent, the early pioneer Scotsman wasn't actually tilling the ground and getting all that heat. He was more managing properties up here. I'm not sure it was any hotter here than it would have been stoking an engine in a ship in the South Seas. The Scotsman seems to be incredibly tough.
Was that your image of your grandfather, of a hard, tough man?
He was a pretty tough guy, yeah.
He was quite a young lad. He was only 18 years old, and he left Glasgow in 1882 and arrived here in Oporto to work for the firm of Graham's, but on the textile side of their business, which was a huge mill here at that time. And he very quickly moved across into the port trade. He got involved in one of the oldest port companies, Warrs. I think he got a good reputation as a taster and a winemaker, and his wines found favour in the British market, and he never looked back, really. He got very fond of the wines he produced, and he loved fishing back in Scotland, so as soon as he managed to make himself a little bit of money, he'd go back for his summer to fish in Scotland. And because a lot of those hotels up there were temperance hotels, you weren't allowed to drink, this didn't go down very well with a port producer. So he'd have a whole lot of little sample bottles made up saying, Mr. Symington, to be taken twice daily after meals. And as a result, he was able to have a little glass of port at the end of his lunch and dinner, just as he was used to back here. He married this very pretty lady called Beatrice Atkinson, whose mother was Portuguese. And as he was, Andrew James was from a Presbyterian stock, long line of, and several Presbyterian ministers we can see in the family tree. I'm not sure it was terribly well received back in Scotland when he announced he was marrying this Catholic girl. But actually it was a wonderful marriage and they were extremely happy. So we have Portuguese blood in our veins as well as Scots blood.
A.J. Symington's problem overcoming the restrictions imposed by the temperance movement were a far cry from the old days at the turn of the 19th century, when judges went so far as taking wine and biscuits into court with them, in case lunch was delayed by the proceedings. Lord Coburn, brother of the founder of Coburn's Port.
Black bottles of strong port were set down beside them with glasses, carafes of water, tumblers and biscuits, and this without the slightest attempt at concealment. The refreshment was generally allowed to stand untouched and as if despised, for a short time, during which their lordships seemed to be intent only on their notes. But in a little while some water was poured into the tumbler and sipped quietly as if merely to sustain nature. Then a few drops of wine were ventured on, but only with the water, till at last patience could endure no longer, and a full bumper of the pure black element was tossed over, after which the thing went on regularly, and there was a comfortable munching and quaffing to the great envy of parched throats in the gallery. The strong-headed stood it tolerably well, but had told plainly enough upon the feeble. Not that the ermine was absolutely intoxicated, but it was certainly sometimes affected.
If manners were changing in Scotland, the rugged isolation of the Douro region has meant the continuation of traditions little changed from the days of the firm's founders.
They were certainly great pioneers, and in fact it's only, even in the last 30 years when I came out here, and we had to go around visiting our farmers on the various quintas. Part of that was done on foot, part of it was done on horseback. Sometimes one had to take the train up the line, cross the river, get a horse and get round these quintas. And the brandy, which is used in port, was carried in pipe by pipe along dry riverbeds on occasions, and certainly not what you would describe in modern terms as roads at all.
You visited the quintas, visited by the various farms, largely by boat, and then, if you were lucky, the farmer would send down a couple of horses to the riverside, and then you would ride up the side of the mountain to visit the quinta, to where the people were foot treading, the must as the wine is called, and then you would make your call, and then you would make sure that the wine was being made in the correct manner. You'd probably have a glass of something and a piece of ham, maybe, and then ride down on the horse back to the boat. Now, things have changed a wee bit since then, but not so very much, and some of these quintas really are very, very remote. And this is one of the reasons why, one of the foremost reasons why port is a relatively expensive drink.
Nowadays, the quinta houses are used for entertaining. John Major and his wife were also recent guests at Mulvedos, but until recently they were pretty Spartan and only occupied at the crucial time of the vintage. Johnny Graham and Alistair Robertson.
It was a planned campaign, and my great-uncles, who would really be in charge, they would be taking stores up for a month. It was the remoteness of it all, the stillness of the nights, the sounds that one heard, and as a child it was, one often arrived at night and the caretaker, the casero, would be down to meet us off the train with a hurricane lamp, and one would then walk up. It would be quite a way up to the house, and as children one have to walk up in the light of the hurricane lamp. And there was the excitement of it all as well. And in those days, of course, there wasn't electricity even in the Douro, and so we had a generator which would come on for a few hours, obviously, when it got dark, and then it was candles.
I remember the first year we put it in, the first vintage we put in, sitting there with the candles and up in the hill and everything else, so we didn't put electricity in there. So we had in the lodge electricity with the lights. We had in the workers, the kitchens and their dormitories and everything, electricity, and we sat there solemnly, no electricity at all, and they were saying, well, this lot even more nutty than the last lot.
One vintage tradition brought out the dual Scots and Portuguese heritage of port making.
My childhood memories of certainly of going to Mulvedos were going down and watching the treading. The first part of the treading is serious. I mean, for the first 4 hours, it's a serious job of actually crushing the grapes. But after that, things relax. And my great-uncle, Gerard, would come down with his accordion, with the old squeeze box, and he would perch on the tank, and he would encourage the men in either playing a Portuguese folklore dance like the Umalhão or the Chula or one of those, or he might break into a Scottish reel like the Eightsum or something like that, which was similar. It was this beaming face with the old white moustache. He loved a party.
Did you ever jump in yourself?
Yes, I did, but it used to come up to my waist, so it's when I was aged about somewhere between 6 to 10, I suppose. It was the time that I remember. And even as a 7 or 8-year-old kid, I would be plonked in, and it was great fun, but one didn't stay there very long.
It's trodden for a very good reason, but it's not a tourist thing. It's not just because it's fun. It is actually because it produces, for that tiny amount of the best possible port, which is really your vintage port, it actually produces, it makes it better than your machinery.
Have you ever jumped in the Lagar yourself?
I have my feet in every vintage since for about 20-odd years. I had more than my feet in sometimes, but the thing gets carried away. We had many an eighths and reel there. Quite difficult doing eighths and reel, your feet in the grates.
Up until as recently as 30 years ago, before the river was dammed, the barrels were often brought downriver on the low-keeled and high-prowed barcos rabellos, the gondola-like boats you can still see as tourist attractions outside the port lodges in Villanova de Gaia. In the warren of cobbled streets you find the lodges and the rich heady bouquet of sweet wine in seasoned wood. In Graham's lodge, I asked Dominic Symington why they still kept the old dirt floors.
If during the summer when the temperatures get very hot, the outside ambient temperature can go up sometimes to 80 degrees, we will water the floor, the evaporation then will cool the air down and bring the entire ambient temperature in the lodge down to something that is appropriate for the wine and aging of port. Here in front of us, it's a big hall converted for receptions where we receive groups, not necessarily groups of tourists. We can hold dinners, receptions up to 200 people. We hold many weddings. People thoroughly enjoy coming here. You get the ambiance of old Oporto. You're in a port lodge. It's very traditional. You can look at the barrels on the one side, and then if you look outside onto the terrace, you've then got the most spectacular view of Oporto on the north bank and the town of Villanova de Gaia with all the port lodges on the south.
Yeah, in the past, I mean, port shippers, until quite recently, they didn't even put their names in the bottles, and now here they are dealing with thousands of tourists.
We have to be realistic about the world. We have to be a bit commercial. We can't sit here in Oporto and expect everybody to beat a path to our door. Obviously, the quality of our wines are absolutely essential, and it is the fundamental to developing any sort of reputation. But we've also got to do some commercial side of the business to further the reputation of Graham's.
In Oporto, the port trade has a most impressive neoclassical building with a strong Adam influence, which wouldn't be out of place in the new town of Edinburgh. In the factory house, every Wednesday, an all-male gathering has a good lunch with claret, discusses business and...
Now, we come to the moment of truth, if you like, and this is when everybody round the table will start pontificating about what the vintage port is. And this one certainly is a decent vintage. Now, perhaps you, Billy, could tell us what it is.
I can only tell you what it isn't. It isn't. I don't think it's a 1963 Taylor's, which was one of the last vintage ports I tasted.
No, I think it's younger than 63. But I think it's a very fine year. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if it were something like 66 or perhaps even 1970. And if it's 1970, which if I'm saying it's 70, is quite definitely not 70, incidentally, because if I get it within 10 years, I reckon I'm doing pretty well. But if it were a 1970, I myself think that 1970 is one of the really great vintages of recent years.
Well, it's only on television they always get it right. Sorry, Peter, it was a war 75. The doyen of the Scottish wine trade, Freddie Stimpson, recalls a friend who never got it wrong.
Another man, Freddie Coburn, who's one of my great recollections of having in a boardroom when one talks of guessing, and guessing isn't the right word, divining is the proper word, the vintage. He always loved a challenge, and so therefore one always was asked to decant something that one wanted to test him with. And we thought often that we could catch him. It was never, ever done. Freddie had this ability to bracket like a Royal Artillery gunner on either side until he was utterly determined and said, it's not this, it's not that, it's not the other thing. And then he suddenly said, I'll tell you what it is. It's a 24, and if you hold on a minute, it's not War, it's not Coburn, one of my own. I know exactly what it is. It's Taylor. And this, he said, I learned because I drank port every day in my life for 65 years. And if I don't know port, I can't do it with other wines, but I surely can with port, whether it's in Scotland or whether it's in Portugal.
The Factory House has always been an important focus for social events for the Scottish community in Oporto. In a letter home to his sister in Scotland in 1826, Archibald Coburn begs for news as no Scotch paper comes here, then reminds her of a previous request.
I petitioned some time ago for a copy of The Scottish Minstrel. A copy of that set of Russian quadrilles would be a great favour, and of any Scotch one you can get. They have one set of Scotch quadrilles, but very poor.
They may have been very poor in the early 1800s, but every time there's a ball at the Factory House, and there's usually one a year, sometimes two, no occasion is complete without a set of Scottish country dancing. The Scottish tradition is very much maintained.
Is it the Eightsome Reel or...?
Well, I think the Eightsome is the one most people know how to do, and when that gets done, I think, to a fairly high standard. It's when they start sort of putting in the Duke of Perth, or Bruin's Reel, as I think it's sometimes called. That has a few people up in a certain amount of difficulty.
And how do they learn to do these?
Well, I learned to do it in Aberdeen years ago, but there is a very flourishing Scottish country dancing group that meets once a week in the autumn at the British Club.
And with all that practice at vintage time doing the paddy ba knee-deep in grapes, St Andrew's Night is an absolute dawdle.
There's a reception, of course, where we drink Athol Brose, all made locally by enthusiastic Scots. We move in for dinner. Then at the end of dinner we have usually two speeches. And, of course, we have an MC who is a Scot, does wear the kilt, works here for Coates and Clark, and who does a wonderful job as the compere. And whisky goes down fairly well. Then we go on with a dance card, which takes us through to about 4 in the morning.
Many of the descendants of the Scots shippers were educated at prestigious English public schools and went on to university there. In Oporto, they had their own culture, factory house, sports club, school and hospital. How does all of this tie in with their Scottish roots and with their relationship with the Portuguese? Anthony Graham.
My father's generation, which was one between them and myself, had, let's say, greater difficulty assimilating. And now Johnny's and my generation assimilate again together. But there was a period after the revolution when relationships, let's say, became a little more distant. But no, my great-uncle's generation, they seem to have an enormous rapport with the Portuguese, which I hope that, Johnny and my generation has.
I was born in Portugal, but one was aware that one was Scottish, there's no doubt about it. And certainly my grandfather's generation actually spoke, or they broke into Scots regularly. I mean, my father didn't, but my great-uncles did.
People say, are you Scots or are you Portuguese? And as we were all born here, in fact, you can see the British hospital where we were born. It's just across the river here. I often think I haven't come very far in my career because I moved from one side of the river to here. The Scots connection is very important to us. My family is full of Scots names. My grandfather was Maurice McAllister Symington. The Symingtons were part of the Douglas clan, and it's always been traditional to call the eldest son, to put the middle name Douglas. My son, who's the 5th generation born out here, is called Robert Douglas Symington. Again, it's a pretty Scots name. Now, I think he's only been to Scotland once, but he regards himself as Scottish. My great-grandmother, Mary Edmonston, who married Andrew James, my great-great-grandmother, I beg your pardon, came from the Isle of Unst in the Shetland Islands. Well, you could hardly get further north than that. So we are a very odd mixture of Scotland and Portuguese. I think it's quite a nice blend, actually.
On a pro rata basis, we do better in Scotland than we do in England and Wales. So it's a very, very important part of our business. And not only that, the Scots, God bless them, drink more better quality wines or better quality ports at least, than the rest of England and Wales. So we're very, very pleased with what we do in Scotland.
And do you think there is an attraction just to the name in Scotland?
Yes, no doubt. We are a Scottish name. Over the years, people have laughed because not everybody is Scottish, and most people sort of tend to pronounce Coburn's Cockburns, which sounds as if you've got a bit of a bad disease and so on. And we make jokes about it the whole time, and it hasn't done us any harm. But at least, as you say, Scotland, you know, the Scots like a Scottish name. Coburn's is as Scottish name as you can possibly get, without a Mac in front of it. It's hardly surprising that we do quite well there.
But in an ideal world, which port would you go for to end an evening, warm your heart and revive your spirits on a cold winter's night? Alistair Robertson.
The thing to linger over, the thing to have is vintage port. And you sit there with vintage port, the decanter goes past gently around, and it changes the evening. People talk, they relax. The ideal age for vintage port is about 20 years old. I mean, you used to always lay, and some people used to lay away a pipe. Nowadays people have to lay away a case or two for their sons or grandsons. And the old tradition was you opened it and drank it together in their 21st year. And sometimes they used to say the port turned out better than the child, but you drank it together like that, and the lovely wine drank together. It's 20 years. For instance, 1970, drunk now, which is, 24 years old, is wonderful. Just the right moment. But on the other hand, vintage port goes on aging. I mean, the 45 and the 48 is heaven.
Me, I'm dreaming of the Douro gliding below the balcony at Mulvedus in the gloaming of a still summer's evening. Graham's tawny is in the glass, and I'm raising it to compatriots present and past.
Scotland has produced people all over the world. They left their native country in search of perfection. And I think with port, they certainly have achieved that perfection. They have not simply come to a country and produced the lowest quality wine at the lowest price. They have come here and they look for perfection, and I think they have found perfection.
Sitting here, I would agree that they achieved perfection, so let's drink some perfection. Cheers.
Gae, bring to me a pint of wine, and fill it in a silver tassie, that I may drink before I go. At service stay, my bonny lassie,